Hi there, and welcome along to episode 148 of the Gersnet Weekly Podcast, a totally free and independent Rangers podcast that is made by fans for fans, where all of our content is always absolutely free. And as we say every week, it's not just the podcast that we have here at Gersnet, but if you head over to our website at www.gersnet.co.uk, you can find a whole host of great content, including the forum, lots of articles, the social media, and a very, very informative history archive as well. If you're joining us live on the podcast tonight, it's just gone 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, the 5th of September, then thank you very, very much for giving up your Sunday evening to join us. Please do let us know your questions, your comments as we go along in the YouTube stream there. We've got Frankie moderating that, and I'm sure he will get to as many questions as he possibly can. If not, the show is always available for download the following day. So that'll be from Monday morning, and that's wherever you get your podcasts from, including Acast, iTunes, YouTube, Castbox, Stitcher, and also on Spotify. It's been quite a strange week, and I must admit, when the schedule for the podcast was posted, you never like to see your name against an international week because you think you can sometimes be sort of scrabbling for content and material, but certainly not been the case this week, and there's plenty for us to get through, both on field and off field, and we'll get to as much of that as we possibly can. So I'm delighted to have two stellar guests to join me. First of all, even though it is an international week, we still can't shake him. Alec Anderson. Alec, good evening. How are you?
Not bad, Ross. Actually, that's a lie. Just to apologise for any coughing or spluttering that might be coming up. I feel absolutely terrible. The worst thing about it is I've had the test and I don't have COVID, so these days I get zero sympathy, even less sympathy than I used to get in this house. I also managed to catch a sore ankle. A fat old man wearing young man's trainers. I twisted my ankle, surprisingly enough, just as it was safe to go back to the ground. So I've been limping to Ibrox and back. And then put my feet up in ice for the rest of the time. But I still managed to get to the Scotland game last night. Hampden. And if you're trying to get any kind of content out of that, you're struggling. Not like myself.
Enjoyable to see Nathan Patterson contributing to that goal.
Very, and that's the end of that.
Fair enough. And I was going to say that with you sort of not feeling maybe a wee bit under the weather and a sore ankle, would you say that you're the Rangers fan who's had the toughest week?
I would definitely say so. I've looked around and I don't really see anybody else that's been through what I've been through.
Yeah.
But I don't like into it because I'm just, I'm not that kind of guy.
Good for you. Soldiering on. Also with us and bringing a touch of professionalism and class to the show, Stewart Weir. Stewart, how are you?
He says looking around for the professionalism and touch of class desperately. For a minute there, when I've gone on to the YouTube channel just to see what was happening there, I thought that Alex was participating in an episode of Casualty. I was ready to don the old fiddle there and play along to whatever he was saying. So anyway.
As long as you stay out of a nurse's uniform, I think we'll be okay.
Only a Thursday every second month.
Fantastic. Right. As I say, gents, it's been a slightly strange week. You tend to find that strange weeks off the park do often follow Rangers winning in an Old Firm. And I have to say, I've not, in terms of the stuff that's been going through the media this week, and in the last couple of days in particular, which obviously we'll come on to address, it's been a really interesting, disappointing, disheartening week to be a Rangers fan, and like us, to be involved in kind of Rangers fan content and fan media, and really us going up against, I say us, as in the kind of Rangers fan base, the Rangers family going up against traditional print media in the way that has happened over the last few days. So, Alec, we go back to last Sunday. Rangers get a very important, a very hard fought and well-deserved 1-0 victory over Celtic at Ibrox, first Old Firm game of the season. Since then, we've had videos emerging of alleged sectarian songs being sung, plenty of reports of anti-Catholic, anti-Irish bigotry. Par for the course, I think it's probably fair to say, following an Old Firm victory for Rangers, that this kind of thing would be dominating newspapers because potentially people are trying to make up for the fact that their team lost. We've had 3 arrests. We've had promise of more arrests. We've had a real media pile-on, and in the last few days we've had very prominent fan media contributors called out in the national media to the extent that they've had to take a step back from producing the Rangers content that they do. First question for you, Alec, is: do you think that we, the Rangers fan base, are being held to a different standard than other fan bases or other demographics across Scotland?
Yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but that might not necessarily be something to criticise those that are holding us to that standard. That might not necessarily be a bad. For me, for many a year, it was part of the privilege of supporting Rangers. I see it means everything to me. I love supporting Rangers, and for me, it was like, if you're going to win all the trophies, if you're going to be the most powerful club in the country, well then that's something that comes with it. You will be, as happens throughout the world, the bigger clubs, the clubs that are winning most things, are kind of generally despised by other fans, and I think we can never underestimate how much of a part that plays in all this. It's actually football stuff, football related, like you're saying. But I think when it got to the point where the kind of pile-ons on Rangers led to us. Well, sorry, I'm not for 1 second saying that liquidation wasn't the fault of the Rangers directors, but it was certainly made us a less attractive asset to a lot of potential buyers. When from about 2009 onwards, radio phone-in programmes and what have you, there was a massive pile of people telling us what was going wrong with our tax. It's been taken to a whole new level, and I think I've always been keen for us to take responsibility for that, and that we had a sectarian signing policy. We sang sectarian songs. They do come out every now and then, still to a lesser extent, but we seem to be getting zero credit for when they don't happen. And I understand that. It should be something that just never happens. But I think living in the real world, you have to be an honest broker when it comes to dealing with something as disgusting as sectarianism. And I am sick to the back teeth of having to preface every conversation I have with a stranger about football who I support, and I see that look in their face, having to tell people both my grandfathers are Catholic or were Catholic. My mother's Catholic. I was never baptized. My sister and I were never baptized or christened, whatever it is, in either faith. I'm not a Protestant. I love Rangers, and the reason I love Rangers is because my Kilmarnock supporting Church of Scotland dad, it was in the Church of Scotland because his Catholic Kilmarnock supporting father had no time for any kind of religion and just let his son and his kids do what they wanted. Just carry out. He knows that in Scotland, he knows that his son's going to be obsessed with football. Hampden has got every European crowd record you can think of, except league attendance. That's Benfica against Porto, 1987. But it's got every kind of European crowd record attendance you can think of. A nation of 5 million. We are football obsessed. And it's also got every kind of cancer, obesity, alcoholism, drug abuse, unwanted records that you can think of in Western Europe, like stabbings and things like that. Scotland's a horrible country at times, a hard place to live in. And football is sometimes the thing that kind of saves us. And I think in the second you want, if your life's is kind of hard like it is for a lot of football fans, a lot of Rangers and a lot of Celtic fans, you just want a win. You want a bit of a result in your life, and then you get accused of glory hunting. So the thing to fall back on is, well, I've always been a Protestant, so therefore I'm actually really always been a Rangers fan. I've always been I'm Catholic, so therefore I've always really had the right to support Celtic. It's not just jumped in the bandwagon of a football team. And that's how the language of football in this country, for the two biggest fan bases by far in this country, it's always been about that. Encouraged to be so by the tabloid press. Back in 100 years ago, who's going to rise up to these, the Hibernians, the Celtic, who's going to come forward and represent Scotland, Church of Scotland or whatever. That's what Rangers kind of came from. And then the guys coming in from the Northern Ireland to the shipyards in the 1920s and what have you. I'm sick of having to, and people be sick of listening to me switching off in their drawers right now, but I'm having to preface everything. I'm getting absolutely paranoid, having to explain all the time that I fully understand how sickening it is. Some of the most precious people in my life are Roman Catholic. And there's people that I just cannot bloody stand, who are Protestant. It's got nothing to do with it. It's the people themselves. And we've all been brought up in football. We get caught up in this kind of language. And I think the occasions on which we are brought to account for this, the timing is it's becoming more and more obvious that it's slightly nefarious. And I think the last people on earth who want sectarianism solved in Scotland, and I see no appetite to have it solved. I only see a hysteria to have it pointed out. There's almost a celebration. There's no horror, disappointment, or heartbreak in so many of the people citing incidents of sectarianism, despicable as they are. There's a kind of, in the last week especially, there's been almost a kind of celebration, a kind of rabidness, a kind of an enjoyment that it still goes on, a willingness to get rid of all the good work Rangers have done, and almost as if they're unhappy that Rangers have actually made strides. And that's what I find worrying. But I can't. I'm basically agreeing with you, Ross, and I don't want to agree with you. I don't want it to be true, but I think the whole incident, everything that's been happening this week, is basically coming down to people wanting exclusive media rights to Rangers. They've used they've used sectarianism as a tool, which is a horrible thing. That is sectarian. That's beyond sectarianism in itself, to use it as a weapon for other means. And I'm just going to say the boys at Heart and Hand, I think, have been used as well in a war, in a war for maybe print media to try and claw back some of the kind of access it's been losing to digital media. And I think that's a horrendous thing, because sectarianism is a cancer. Bigotry of any form is cancerous, and but you need to be an honest broker when you're trying to sort it out. I'm sorry if that's an absolute rant and incoherent, but it's because it's been that kind of week. My head's actually minced with it.
Yeah, it is a huge amount for us to kind of process, and especially when, as you say, Rangers is something that we all hold incredibly dear to us. You know, the amount of money and time and emotion that we invest into supporting the club, it's astronomical. And to see the club being attacked, the fan base being attacked, fans like us, content creators like us being attacked and used because our team won and the other team didn't. And that's to a large degree how I see it. And I think, so to give some context to anyone who's kind of not aware of what's happened this week, is we had the usual Rangers win, and therefore there's reports of sectarian singing, and that's to distract away from the result. We then have, in the last few days, a tabloid newspaper in Scotland running a big story about creators over at Heart and Hand, Rangers podcast, and historic tweets that were, in some instances, containing unsavoury, offensive, inappropriate, and in some cases allegedly sectarian language, which has led to those creators stepping back from the podcast, and that's kind of where we've got to now. The issue that I have with this, and the reason that I question is, are Rangers held to a different standard, is the way that it feels to me is that Rangers are not the only club that has and by the way, I should preface this by saying certainly no one on this show, and I don't think I've seen anyone trying to defend any of the language that's been used. If people are singing sectarian songs, writing sectarian messages, no one is defending that and saying that that's acceptable behaviour. I think that where the outrage comes and the disappointment comes from our side is everyone else is held to a different standard, and you know, we are the fans who are having their kind of histories looked over to see, did we ever tweet a naughty word? And it's videos of fan groups singing songs glorifying the IRA or using sectarian language against those of a Protestant faith that doesn't get picked up in that way. Stuart, that brings me on to the question of whataboutery, which is a word that
I use a lot.
Yeah, it's a word that seems to be used as a kind of shut down the argument, right? So if a Rangers fan let's say a Rangers fan is accused of singing something sectarian or tweeting something sectarian, you could then say, but here's an example of countless other fans of other football clubs of different backgrounds doing something similar, doing something comparable, doing something worse. Where was the outrage for that? The word whataboutery is put in and the argument shut down. What's your take on that?
I have used that word several times myself, maybe even several hundred times. because I've never really advocated that if somebody has done something wrong, then it's made right by somebody else doing something wrong. And I think, unfortunately, that's what we've seen in Scotland over a period of time. There has been a bit of, how can I put it very succinctly, a bit of mischief making, let's say, where there are certain, and I'll skip the newspaper side of it momentarily. I will go to the political aspect of it. There have been certain individuals who have picked sides and only see one side. Now, at times, yes, they might hear things being sung, they might see things being said. However, the following week, do they really tune into Sky Sports and think that some of the songs that are coming from the terracings are American country and western hits from the 1930s or 1940s? No, I think you need to be naive in the extreme to believe that. Yet, forget the whataboutery part of it. That argument, if you point that out, is just shut down. They don't even offer up an argument to that. And I think that side of it is particularly worrying if you are supposed to live in a country where you're allowed to have a voice, or at least point out to people who are in authority or who are in power about what's going on. It seems to me that doesn't happen. And, you know, going back to what's happening with newspapers, it's always been very easy, I would say, to do very little digging to come up with an example of songs being sung at a number of football grounds. The coverage that's given sometimes varies and is sometimes different, but I don't think you need to dig very far. However, having worked in newspapers for a great many years, the one thing that I was always asked if I ever presented a story about anything was, and how will this affect you? Or how will this affect the guys on your desk? Or how will this affect us as an entity, as a newspaper? And I think that has been forgotten about this week. I think some people might have just gone for the jugular and decided this is a really good story. You know, I don't want to be all biblical and say, you know, he is without sin, cast the first stone. But the fact of the matter is that was almost should have been your guidance on this one, because I think, as I said earlier, you don't need to dig very far to find examples that will cause outrage and will have people making headlines for what has been said. But I think this week what I've seen is, when it's come to digging, that there are certain elements of, especially within the Rangers support, who would have made very good miners in the American coal fields in the 1800s, because they have dug deep and come up with things that people don't really want to see. And I know, again, and I've said this before about, you know, having worked in the newspaper industry, you might get an apology on page 8. I doubt very much if any such apology would ever come on the front page of a newspaper, despite, you know, many calls for that kind of thing over the years. So people can be hung out to dry with a story, and any apology that's made is then knocked into about 3 or 4 paragraphs inside. I think most people, however, can make up their own mind about how they might view things in the future. And, you know, again, just like you can, my television has got an on and off switch. I can decide where and when I might spend money on purchasing a newspaper, if I do purchase a newspaper, or whether I wait on various press releases and see what they say before I make any judgment call. So I think it's well within the parameters and well within the capabilities of individuals to decide where they go looking for their news now. And it wouldn't surprise me if some are looking elsewhere after this week.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And if, as Alec mentioned, a few moments ago, if this was a kind of play to try and scrape back some followers of fan media, of new media, take it back to kind of traditional broadcast and newspaper media, then it doesn't seem to have been overly well thought out. I think that, so as Stuart references there, what's happened as a reaction to this heart and hand stuff is that Rangers fans have very much reacted and rallied to dig through the communications history, personal communications history of journalists, of politicians who are really piling into this issue and being very, very critical of those individuals and of the Rangers support in general, and found stuff that employers would not want to see, and that you really shouldn't be kind of going after people for historic tweets without checking your own historic tweets in the first place. And I think that people, both in the media and in the political class, that are out to demonise the Rangers support are deliberately mistaking that Rangers fan reaction to be a kind of an implicit acceptance or support for the actual arguably offensive language that was used. That is absolutely not the case. Rangers fans are not reacting in this way, in a way of saying, well, I think we should be allowed to use that language, and I think that singing these songs is okay. It's to say, you are not treating us fairly. You are not treating us equally. And so I asked the question a moment ago about whataboutery, and that word really pisses me off because it is just used to shut down a legitimate debate in this context. There would be no need for whataboutery, what about this, what about that, if there was parity, if there was equality in the way that fan bases and sections of society were treated. And that's the frustration that I have. And I think that is a deliberate misunderstanding from people who want to criticise and say, look at these Rangers fans, they're now having a go at the journalist who wrote the story because they think it's okay to be using sectarian language. Absolutely not the case. We want the equality and parity in the way that different sections of footballing society are treated. Alec, it's been as I say, a really quite tense week, I think, to be a Rangers fan, and there's been a lot of really critical things said about us in the media yet again. Where do we go from here? Because it seems to be getting worse and worse. You go online to social media and it is just a load of people shouting at each other. What about this? What about that? You said this, you said that. And it's incredibly toxic. Surely it can't continue. So what can be done about
it? I think it will drive a lot of people just to give up on football. I've been through this before. Back in 2010-11, when, let's not forget, and as you're saying, Ross, we're not for a second trying to shy away from how horrible it is to treat someone with sectarian language, racist language. I mean, what we went through with Glenn Kamara, it's. Sorry, I'm actually stumped because there's so much to say. It's like a log jam in my fat head right now. But it's whataboutery for me is usually aimed at you when you're looking for context, when you're actually trying to apply a context and a bit of, look, let's see why this has happened. Let's see how bad it is. Like there's no. We shouldn't be getting praised for like half the Ibrox crowd last week at least applauding the players taking the knee. Christ, we're applauding Celtic players when they did give us the ball back for a throw in earlier than the actual incident right at the end of the injury time. There shouldn't be that's just things you should do. You shouldn't get praised for them. But it's a kind of why you're not going about that as well. Why you're not seeing that there's progress there. I remember as far back as 2010-11, as I say, I think it was when we played Celtic twice in the Scottish Cup. They drew 2-2 at Ibrox. Scott Brown's in, El Hadj Diouf's face. And then we have the game at Parkhead. Neil Lennon's been sent bombs and bullets. That's something we can never forget. And the idea that every Rangers fan was capable of doing that, I would think to do that, it's crazed. Obviously not. But a friend of mine at the time was telling me that's it. My wife's asking me what is all this stuff. I mean, it was Alex Salmond was having a summit meeting live on Sky Sports, from Butte House, about the state of the nation, because two guys that get sent off in an Old Firm game. Some of the coaching staff had a bit of handbags. 60,000 people at Parkhead had stood there and went, "Oh, what's happening?" All right, and all went home. But the next day, it's the classic, political football, pun intended. It really is. And I know maybe that's what Stuart's alluding to as well, partly. But I know the people who, like their wife said to them, "What's this all about?" And I can't actually justify this anymore. I can't explain why me loving Rangers leads to bombs and bullets going to a guy, for a house and sockets. Just round the corner from my Catholic maternal grandmother's, by the way, that bomb was sent. So it's that device, viable device. People will end up just giving up on the game, because it's just such a toxic atmosphere. And seeing it, I think social media is as much social media as a toilet. As I said, there's been a lot of talk about cesspits recently. That's a cesspit in general, social media. And I'm as big a culprit as anybody else of just going to it straight away because we want more content. I think in terms of fan media, I don't see why. I grew up, Rangers won the cup final every year. That we won the cup final 8 years in a row when I first started remembering football, 70s into 80s, and it was the Daily Record. I got the centre page spread on cup final day. There was team picture of Rangers and Celtic, Aberdeen, whoever they were playing. So you cut one out and you put the Rangers one up on the wall. There's an affection there for it's part of our life, and it deals in the salacious and it deals in this kind of thing. But I don't see why fan media is such a threat to them. Because don't get me wrong, that was the whole tenor of the piece on the Heart and Hand Boys. They were constantly hammering home the message. These are the guys that are getting media access at Rangers. These are supposed to be providing you with unbiased. But they're called fan media. It says it on the tin. They're not for 1 second pretending to be anything other than Rangers fans, which is actually more honest than a lot of the stuff you're getting from the Tabs or other newspapers, which is basically football. It used to be a soap opera. It's a bit of theatre. They're quite right to wind us up and get us going to a certain extent, and put a bit of an angle and stuff. But I think they should learn to work together. There should be a place, please, for both forms of media in football. Anything that can get the game publicised and keep us, because make no mistake about it, it does affect attendances, how it's covered and who covers it. But I feel I would not for 1 second want anybody to think I was trying to dampen down, try to ameliorate the toxicity of sectarian behaviour, of any kind of bigotry. And the boys last week, but I think what happens is you get a situation where it's been raised in Parliament, and they've been cited as black shirts, because they're ultras. It was an Italian movement, it's an Italian fashion. They wear black. I'm not saying that the Celtic, what are they called, the Green Brigade, they're all wearing the little 1970s Bogside IRA style jerkins. I don't think for a second that any of these boys are going to end up being snipers or what have you, try to take out. So it's just. Some have got the more we kind of split the support and we don't give anybody any room to breathe and this kind of stuff, the worse the problem will get. Because people just get polarised and they just go to extremes. Social media doesn't help with that. But I think we've just got to kind of screw the nut generally. Rangers have got to keep doing what they're doing. Rangers are banning the people. They're taking the police information, they're banning the boys that are singing those songs. To me, they are boys. Sorry, that's a terrible thing to say. I'm not condoning it because of their age, but we know in the real world this is what happens. You behave stupidly, but it's outside the ground. There's nothing Rangers can really do about it. They've found out who they are. They've banned them. The same as they banned the boys in the Bus Fiscal Bride that were singing the racist stuff about the Japanese forward at Celtic. I don't know. I just feel as if the whole thing has got to calm down and everybody's got to keep doing the good work. And I'm sorry about being so incoherent and ranty, but it's made me really emotional this week for the reasons you were saying, Ross. It's just we had a great win, and then I'm not trying to say for a second that it's been spoiled by the media folks. It's on us. The Rangers supporters did this, but we've got to. There's got to be a bit of balance. I think in how it's reported. Because we can't be too hard on ourselves, because we had a video that was doctored last season that was taken seriously by leading politicians in this country, of allegedly black Rangers players singing anti-Catholic lyrics while they were celebrating winning the league trophy. And that was never properly apologised for. The fact that was so much, and the thirst to somehow make that kind of take back what had happened to Glenn Kamara, like people didn't, like somehow that meant Glenn Kamara hadn't been racially abused, as if we wanted Glenn Kamara to be racially abused at all, as if we didn't deserve the sympathy. It's got out of control, and I don't know how, but it has got to stop.
I'm not going to cut across you, Alex, but just
please, Stuart, please.
Just what you said there, you brought it back to a point I made earlier, was that there is so much of this is political and politically driven by certain individuals. Nobody's going to condone the Rangers fans if they were singing certain songs. Rangers can only do so much. Rangers can only basically punish those that are caught. Rangers can only support the police and the authorities and whatever they're trying to do. But when you have certain politicians who are able to say whatever they so wish without censure and without even issuing an apology afterwards, then where do you actually start? That, the word whataboutery was used earlier on. You cannot start having, whataboutery when it comes to political leaders or people in political influence actually making these accusations, but only doing it through one eye and only doing it if it affects one side of the argument. That is, for me, is particularly worrying in all of this. And I think, until such times as somebody somewhere calls some of these politicians to order and basically said, you cannot be doing these kind of things, then I honestly feel this is something that's going to continue for a while, because what you then have are media outlets and looking at it and saying, well, if the politicians are saying this and they're getting away with it, we'll get away with it as well. The difference is nowadays in terms of journalism and newspapers, whereas before a newspaper might be selling 600,000 copies, they might only be down to 150,000 copies these days and trying desperately to stay relevant. They don't have the access that they once did. Other people online are actually saying things that are, people can actually join in with. If a newspaper wronged you years ago, you either sued them for libel or in Scotland for defamation. Very few people actually did that because of the resource you had to have to take somebody to court. Now, you don't need anything like that. If you want to hold somebody to account within the media for something they've said, you just take the social media, pull the pin, start the pile-on, and off you go. And at some point in time, somebody has to call a halt to this and say, is this really what we're about, either in terms of the media, or is this really what we're about in terms of the narrative that we're actually trying to create for ourselves? It needs to be quite cleverly thought out, this one. And I don't think anybody, when they're running around with their head on fire, has actually been very clever in this.
Well, it's remarkably sinister, isn't it, Stuart, the way that that politicians get involved in this pile. There's no other word for it in my mind than a pile on. And I wonder if it's something to do with the special interplay between football, politics and media in Scotland. Alec alluded earlier to the fact that everyone in Scotland of a certain generation grew up a passionate football fan and probably supported one of two clubs. And it's so tribal and it's so ingrained in people that seems to rise above everything else, and therefore when you have and I say that interlink between football, politics and media, because it's very obvious to see which politician supports which football club. I mean, half of them have got social media pictures of them wearing the shirt of the club that they support. But when you have, for example, the events of last weekend or earlier this week, and the politician that you go to is the health secretary to comment on the sectarianism incidents, that doesn't make sense unless there's another agenda at play there. And then you see, well, actually, the health secretary has social media photographs of him wearing his Celtic strip. Well, now it makes sense that that's the person that you would go to ask that question. It is remarkably sinister. Stuart, the last question I wanted to ask on this is, Rangers, as I say, or as Alec mentions, have banned individuals as a result of alleged sectarian activity last weekend. And there has been some criticism that Rangers have maybe acted overly hastily there, innocent until proven guilty and whatnot. Would you agree with the actions that Rangers are taking, or do you think that they're maybe jumping the gun to try and, I don't know, please certain people or keep things as smooth as possible?
I'd say that was an interesting one, Ross, or an interesting take on it. If Rangers almost are falling into the trap of actually appeasing the baying crowd by taking these decisions before anybody's been, even taken to court. However, what I would say is, I don't think Police Scotland ever enter into making arrests for these kind of things lightly, because they know themselves, and knowing certain police officers, myself, who are involved in this kind of thing, they know that this is basically something that can blow up in their face. They know that how dangerous anything like this is, simply because they suddenly come under the kind of scrutiny that others might have come under this week, and they can't afford to be doing that when they've got real police work to do. So equally, Rangers could ask anybody who's been arrested, are you guilty of this? And they can say one of two things. They can either say, no, I'm not, and then you wait and see until the court case, or they can say, yeah, I'll come clean. If they come clean, Rangers have every entitlement to ban them. But this whole thing about lifetime bans as well. I mean, Rangers will always word it and couch it in terms that means that all they're doing is kicking the can down the road as to whether they let these people back into the ground, or whether they actually allow them to support Rangers or see Rangers games again. Nobody's going to argue with that, simply because these people have been seen to have done something that's wrong, to seen something that's actually not Rangers back in the water for what they're trying to achieve in terms of cleaning up the club's image and or even the perceived image of the club. And that side of it is something that, whilst you would like to think that people are going to be given the chance to defend themselves, I think probably, and it's like failing a drug test in athletics and then testing the B sample. The B sample is the exact same as the A sample, and you will be, if you're guilty on the A sample, nothing changes because it's the same. It's basically the same test. And I think that's happening with the Rangers fans who've been found guilty. Again, I will say, and I'll say it until I'm probably purple in the face. There is only so much Rangers can do. There are authorities out there, namely Police Scotland, who can do a hell of a lot more. But there is only so much that Rangers can do in terms of the actions that certain individuals try to take. I mean, how many times have you seen people that have been found guilty of singing songs on a Saturday and it's gone back to Rangers, when these people have never been to a Rangers game? We saw it years ago when somebody decided, I'm trying to think, it was against Beitar Jerusalem or in one of the UEFA Cup ties. It's coming out and deciding they're going to handcuff themselves to a post, and Rangers are fined €13,000 for somebody who's a complete nut job running the length of the pitch and handcuffing himself. That is something you cannot legislate for unless
he was wearing a t-shirt of the Pope, Stuart.
Correct. That is something, Alex, that you cannot legislate for. So there has to be a bit of common sense in all of this. But again, going back to the point, without labouring it too much on what Ross asked, I think that Rangers have to be seen to be doing the right thing. I have to say, up until now, they have done the right thing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good take on it. I just saw, as you mentioned, Beitar Jerusalem there, I saw Alec's face desperate to correct you and say it was Maccabi Haifa.
It was Maccabi Haifa. I could now say for all of our Israeli listeners, I apologise. I apologise most profusely. I'm really sorry.
It was, as a deranged sectarian Rangers fan, I was only wanting to get in the bit about the guy who was wearing a T-shirt with the Pope's face on it. That's the only bit I remember, because I exploded with sectarian hatred.
Was that one of your relations that texted you there?
That's my cousin Joe.
Right, gents, before we move on, please allow me just to mention very quickly one of our partners that we have here at Gersnet who are supporting the show this evening, which is our good friends over at footballprizes.co.uk, who run excellent prize draws for very, very special football memorabilia. At the moment, they are offering a one-of-a-kind Rangers Champions squad signed and framed photo montage, which has been signed by 19 different members of last season's squad. As always, a maximum of 99 tickets are available in the competition, with a guaranteed live draw that's coming up on Wednesday, the 8th of September at 8:30 p.m. Tickets are £4.95. Roughly half of those tickets are still remaining. So please do head over to the website at footballprizes.co.uk or check out the Gersnet social media pages for the direct link. Gents, moving on to on-field action, and whilst we haven't had any Rangers games to talk about this week, it's a good time now that this first sort of little block of games is done to look back and see where we are. Obviously, Europe, I think, has probably been a wee bit of a disappointment, not qualifying for the Champions League. But when we look at the Premiership itself, Alec, not maximum points, but still in a relatively strong position with a very, very important Old Firm victory last Sunday. Would you say that, purely domestically speaking, the opening chunk of this season has been a success?
Yeah. It remains to be seen. I like to think right now we're just doing that thing of we're champions, and it's different. I look at the league table, which we didn't really pay much attention until last week. Perhaps I was told that Hearts and Hibs were both undefeated, and nobody cares. We are sitting on the back wheel like a great ride on the Tour de France. We're sitting on the back wheel, this little peloton, just ready to move into first place. Europe, massive. I think it's a massive disappointment, obviously, that we didn't get into the Champions League. But I kind of feel we needed the money. We needed the Champions League money. But I think Steven Gerrard said himself, maybe we didn't need the leatherings that we might have got. If we'd got into a serious group and you see how we struggled against Malmo, a Malmo team who are much more into their season than us. I feel we might be plateauing. The worry about not getting into the Champions League is I think this is a team kind of heavily fueled by just ambition, by going up the way, and I don't think they'll actually enjoy. The way we eventually won the league after 3 seasons with Steven Gerrard, to do it unbeaten. And the way we did it was like a kind of everything's coming to our heads. They've been aiming for this, and finally it's happening. You can see the continual improvement every season. And I'm stuck. I don't know. We won't know until the end of the season how to look at the way this season started. It's either a kind of plateauing and we're going to the Europa League and the players won't have the ambition, having been there before so recently and given it so much and going through their group stage unbeaten, finishing top of the group. They might feel a little bit, been here, seen this, done this, 3 seasons in the bounce in these group stages. I really wanted to be in the Champions League. It might kind of affect their performance, or it's a case of this is actually where we should be. We're built for this. We've got loads of experience. We know how to negotiate this, and we go on maybe an extra round or two this year. I'm really not sure how it's going to pan out. But I would like to think that right now, what we've done is the past 3 seasons, we have got to catch up. We've got to catch up with a team who's got to, and the way we've started each season has been really impressive. By the standards of the previous season, we can see that the team is improving. They still have the thirst and the hunger. This season, it's been a bit kind of stop-start. But I like to think that's like Walter Smith, the kind of middle 94, 95, 96 season, the kind of middle of our 9 in a row, where we could just get into our groove nice and slowly. And I think we hit the floor running last weekend. There was a picture of the Rangers players when they're coming off the park. I think it was Sports Scene actually caught the highlights by the time I actually get back last Sunday. They were just coming off the park, and I think Aribo and Kamara were having a bit of a laugh But the way the camera was just in the halfway line, the boys, they've done a little bit of a lap of honour. How good was that, by the way, just to actually celebrate with the players again? And they're coming towards the tunnel, and they're not even smiling. They just have a look on their face of, we know how to do this shit. We know it's going to be tough, but we're comfortable doing it. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. We're not going to, over-celebrate this. We're ready to go again. And they just did a look of a seasoned squad. Even though we didn't have our first team available, they just looked, I was so impressed. I got a real feeling of, yeah, we're in the groove here. It's like we're starting slower because we're going to go further. So we'd like to have been in the Champions League, but I feel a bit like the Champions League I did about the Scottish Cup last season. I didn't want the Scottish Cup played at all last season. I didn't, because there was a risk that would give us a disappointment perhaps on the final day of the season. We needed in our history to just enjoy that league title. Luckily, we went out the Scottish Cup nice and early, so we got to finish the season on our league high. But if you're going to be in it, you want to win it. And we were in the Champions League and we didn't get into the group stage, and it's disappointing. But I think it might work out for the best in the long run.
Can I just say something on that, Alex? You're saying there about the European campaign and how the guys want to be playing in the Champions League. I think that would have been the preferred choice. Personally, I think they use the European matches this season will almost be used to guarantee your place in the league side. You will have to perform at a certain level, and and doing quite a bit of work, for you might describe English paymasters. You're suddenly acutely aware of where Steven Gerrard is held. His stock has risen amongst a great many south of the border because of the way that Rangers won the title last season unbeaten. However, there are, I would say, probably more people impressed with how Rangers have actually performed on a European stage, which is not canted by how big other teams are or how small other teams are or what your budgets are and all the rest of it. A bit like what Scotland, is in Scotland. You know that after the Old Firm, everybody else only has a fraction to spend on playing squads. You know that they're therefore not going to be as good. You know, therefore, that Rangers would probably start favourites against most teams. I think on the European stage, however, you've got some wily coaches, some really good players who themselves, I'm talking about opposition here, who themselves are playing for big moves elsewhere in Europe and within European football. And I think for me, that's been a better gauge as to where Rangers have been in the last couple of seasons. I think if you look at what Rangers did last season, going in and beating in the league, there was a lot of those performances that Rangers managed to, pick up 3 points, that where they might have been lucky on other occasions to get away with a draw. I think they called upon their European experience for that, because they knew how to win big matches and important matches and what it took to get them over the line. So I personally, I think, competition-wise, I think Rangers will be probably going as much for broke in terms of the Europa League as they would have been with the Champions League.
Good. That sounds good to me, Stuart. I think what happened was against Malmo, we come up against a kind of European a Champions League standard low block, if you like a European Livingston almost, and it was like that next learning curve. When we were, Stevie G lost that game at Livingston. I might have a nightmare at the prospect of travelling to Europe in the future and finding a place like Livingston. If you go to Rome, the Tony Macaroni will be a genuine actual Tony Macaroni. Genuine pasta. I know. I think. Yeah. I hope you're right, Stuart. I think you're spot on there. I think. Hopefully we're fully charged again. And plateauing is no bad thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing when the rate of improvement that we've been under Gerrard. Let's just take a breath and kind of stabilise. And just one more point on that. You have to appreciate if Rangers have made a kind of not slow start or dodgy start. You've got to realise and appreciate where they set the bar last season. Do you know what I mean? This is, I know you like your sporting analogies. This isn't somebody basically running up and doing a bit of a high hurdle to cross the bar. This is your Dick Fosbury running up
and or Xavier Sotomayor, and almost out-jumping the actual equipment because of what they did last season, it would be a really, really tough ask to pick up where you left off last season, simply because Rangers did set the bar as high.
We don't have to jump as high, but it doesn't mean it'll be a flop.
I like what you did there.
Sorry, Stuart. Sorry.
It's all right.
Smashing. I hope everyone's enjoying the Gersnet Athletics podcast. I think this is actually the first show that we've had since the closure of the transfer window back on Tuesday of this week. And Alec, we probably spoke a lot over the last 3 months or so about players who might leave, more so than players who might come in. I mean, one or two long persistent rumours throughout the window of signings, but it was more about who will we hold on to and who will we have to sell. And often it was those words, have to sell, as opposed to just who will we sell. Were you surprised then to see the window close on Tuesday without the likes of Glenn Kamara, Alfredo Morelos, Tavernier, Goldson, Barisic heading out the door? I mean, we literally held on to every key member of the squad.
You said to me after the Malmo game, yeah, I've been absolutely shocked and delighted. But it became, I was really pleased. But it became kind of obvious. It was just was nothing happening. There was no, and the transfer market in general, I think it's COVID's obviously affected, turnovers, as we know, the attempts to set up a Super League and what have you amongst the bigger clubs. So it was a really strange transfer market and pretty dead, no matter what the boys in Sky Sports News and the girls would try to tell you. It was, even the Messi and Ronaldo transfers were pretty boring. We're not doing anything very exciting as far as I was concerned. But it's great. I know and I understand that people were thinking we should have had maybe a ready-made kind of first team, somebody who just come in and slot into the first team. But at Rangers level, our level of spending, that's going to be difficult. That's difficult at the best of times. Even when Ryan Kent, we knew what we were getting with Ryan Kent, because we had him on loan, and then we forked out the money on him. And even then, there was a little spell we thought, is he actually going to be as good? He was kind of struggling at first. Various reasons for it and that. So it's never a guarantee. It's just as it's not a guarantee that the likes of Lundstrom or Sakala, who haven't, for various reasons, haven't had a chance to impress so far, won't turn into that very player that we need that can slot into the first team. But no, mate, I thought as soon as we went out to Malmo, I think Barisic, Kamara and Morelos, I think were probably the three favourites. Everybody thought at least one of them was going to have to go to make up the shortfall. But maybe that would have been if we dropped into the conference, the Europa Conference League, that would maybe have happened. I think it's just meant probably that we haven't brought in as many players as we wanted to. We haven't bought maybe just one more kind of potential first teamer. But I was absolutely delighted. I was delighted to have them all still on board. The Sky's still, I think we've still got a few contracts to sort out, and I'm still keen to know what kind of negotiations were going on in terms of, I think the Champions League qualification would have played a big part. But if they haven't gone now, there's less chance that the likes of Goals and all that are going to go mid-season. And right now, I'm delighted to have all those guys still on board.
Well, but on that subject there, Alex, about who you were expecting to leave Rangers, my take on it always was that whilst you had the fees being paid for the likes of Lukaku and for Grealish and the likes, that was your blue chip high end European clubs that were doing that. I don't think there was the same amount of money mid sector, if you like. I think you had the people that were going, Noel Edmonds introducing Swap Shop for the Scottish market, saying, I want a centre and a half, can I have that Skeletrics? Or whatever it is, here's 2 goldfish in a balloon, can I have that striker who hasn't scored for the last 14 months? That was where the Scottish trading was. I think if you look at the high end, there's plenty, it was awash with money, but they're on down. There wasn't the same money. And if you take there was a couple of transfers, the likes of Grealish, Lukaku, one or two other big signings within Europe as well. or within the English market, the likes of Ronaldo, for instance, the fact that West Ham spent 30 million on somebody, the actual transfer, the average transfer fee was down substantially, and I think that is the fact that they were willing to spend big if the product was right. Nobody was actually speculating to accumulate. Hence the reason why I think that Rangers actually kept some of the players who might have gone under different circumstances.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When it comes then to players being brought in, Stuart, I mean, I think it's fair to say we didn't improve the first 11. And that was a lot of the narrative that we've had around this window, is that we've maybe improved the squad with the likes of John Lundstrom and Juninho Bacuna coming in, but we've not improved the first 11. I saw a wonderful stat recently that said that Rangers this season have retained 96.73% of the minutes that were played last season, if that makes sense. Celtic, conversely, have retained 48%, and that shows the scale of the rebuild and the different strategies in those two clubs. So with that stat in mind, did we need to improve the first 11 to go on and achieve the aim of winning the league again?
You also ended up last week bizarrely with Celtic taking the plaudits for how much they'd actually generated in the transfer market, where they'd actually guys wanting out the door and wanting to leave the club. I didn't know there was a prize from anyone for how much you actually brought in, or how much you stuck in your cash register. The thing with the transfer window is, I think you have to look at it as well, that Rangers kind of staggered their business. I still think that the most influential signing that Rangers have made was Scott Wright. I think he's a kind of guy who, in terms of cutting edge in his creativity, I think he's the kind of guy that could be seen over this season in particular as a player who might even match the influence of Ryan Kent. I think he has that kind of presence about him. I think he's a great foil for Kent. If you manage to play a system where you can get the two of them in the team, even better. I think just now it's like we play, in Stephen Gerrard's mind, we play one or we play the other. I think at some point in time that Rangers might actually line up slightly differently to accommodate the players that they do have who are making a difference in the team. And that could mean that you've got two holding midfielders that are going to be replaceable because of who you've got sitting in the bench, because everybody's on a par with each other and they're interchangeable. And forward of that, you're looking for more of a cutting edge, not just coming from one flank, or whether Kent comes through the middle or goes left or goes right, but you've actually got a threat on both sides. That might, Rangers have been fortunate with the guys they have playing in the full-back roles, in terms of Tavernier, in terms of Barisic, in terms of Bassi as well, who I have to say, for me, has started the season really well. But I think that side of it, you're looking for these guys to actually maybe just hold back a wee bit and defend a bit better, rather than causing a few sort of panic attacks, especially late on in games because they're charging forward, and leave it for the attackers to actually attack and score the goals.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That was actually going to be my next question, Alec, and as we tip over to the hour, I'll make sure this is my last question to you. But our promising youngsters, the likes of Nathan Patterson, Calvin Bassey, who I agree with Stuart, I think has been superb start of this season and really exciting and enjoyable to watch. Stevie Kelly as well in the centre of the park. They're going up in positions. Fullbacks, you can only have one of each side of fullbacks, and one of them is our captain. The other is arguably one of our most financially valuable assets, starting left back of a top 5 international football team. Stevie Kelly going in centre midfield up against some of our best performers in Steve Davis or Glenn Kamara. What's the strategy this season for trying to bring through some of that talent and stop it seeping out and going elsewhere?
I think we actually saw it. I think we saw it in action last week, Ross. It's needs must. These guys will get their chance. You know, we do it so often. We think, oh, we've got too many players for one position. We'll be doing this, like, you know, we've got Patterson and Tavernier, like you say, it's a great headache to have, you know, and we've got, you know, McLaughlin and Alan McGregor. How are you going to keep both those guys happy? Well, none of the four of them were available last week. It just, you know, the reality of a season, especially when COVID's been added to it over the last year and a half, suddenly you're going to need these boys. I think as Stuart's alluding to, the rapid advance of Scott Wright's Rangers career is maybe, as well as the financial shortfall from not getting into the Champions League, is probably why we let Big Cedric go out on loan to Greuther Fürth. And I was kind of disappointed with that, and I think Steven Gerrard would be as well. He was always keen to talk the big guy up. You know, he just seemed that little yard short of match sharpness, and he couldn't quite get any. An amazingly talented player, and I'm just a bit worried. I don't know if he's from the German-speaking part of Switzerland, but I think, you know, if he starts hitting the net over there, we won't see him again. You know, I think he'll get snapped up. But if it's Scott Wright coming through, and that's probably helped that decision. And we're talking about who's coming in. Well, you forget that we actually had Patterson and Bassey coming through, and Bassey, I think, is just basically 2-3 games this season. He's suddenly shown himself to be the player we're hoping he would be. And Nathan Patterson, I'm saying there was no noise the last week. He was actually the guy attracting most noise. The last 2 or 3 seasons, we've been thinking it's going to be Kamara, Barisic, Morelos, but it was Nathan Patterson that was getting the alleged Everton bids. I think, we certainly don't get time to get into the argument about B teams and what have you. There comes a point you need these players to play. The manager is looking at accommodating. He's tried out accommodating James Tavernier. Further forward. I think that's going back. That's an argument we've had for years. That kind of player, a wing back, I think they need to start at the back and get the engine running and be in full flow. I think they need the length of the pitch to get going. So I don't know if that doesn't really seem to be a starter for me. But it's going to be a headache because we want guys, especially like Stephen Kelly. He looked fantastic against Arsenal that pre-season friendly. Could have won the game for us. But you want to see them, especially at that age, you want to see him getting regular football coming on. Glenn Middleton, you wonder if we're ever going to get him back playing regularly for us. Has he got what it takes? I don't know. Even when you play B team football every week, you're not playing to the level that you want in the first team. And I think the Nathan Patterson story, the trajectory, watching him last night, actually, where I was sitting right in the front of the main stand over towards the Rangers end, I thought he'd actually scored. I didn't see the touch. I thought it was actually him that put it in the net, so I was going nuts. People just thought I was a really keen Scotland fan. But it was lovely for him. And I think he's going to become first team. He's going to become first choice. I think maybe quicker than we realise, only because of Tav's maybe advancing years. I think he's a smashing footballer, James Tavernier. I love watching him going forward. He's a remarkably skillful player. I mean, missed him last week. The thing we do, he gets us to the byline and pulls the ball back like nobody else at Rangers. The goal last week comes from a corner, which is the classic way of pulling the ball back. The byline. We were facing up last week because we didn't have that kind of penetration that Tav gives us. We've also got Ryan Jack coming back as well, hopefully. There's plenty of good stories there. There's plenty of depth that could come in. But your question, Ross, as usual, I've rambled away from it.
Come back, Alex.
Happy. Sorry, I just keep thinking about you in that nurse's outfit, Stuart. That's it's got me all over the place.
Can I just say? I think Steven Gerrard, in terms of the pushing Tavernier forward, I don't really think he's an advocate of that. I think he's the kind of guy that he's got 2 guys that can play that position. He either plays one or he plays the other. I don't think he's into experimenting or dare I say it, doing a Walter Smith and deciding my 5 or 6 best players are all centre backs. Therefore, I'll try and squeeze them all into the team at the same time. The other two I would suggest. One is Bakuna. I think Bakuna is the kind of guy who has a reputation of people actually saying, how did Rangers manage to sign that guy? And the point you said about having the 2 goalkeepers, it would not surprise me at all in the very near future if the best that McGregor or McLaughlin can do is be on the bench to McCrory.
That'd do for me.
Bold prediction. We'll see. Gents, I was worried before today's show that we wouldn't have anything to talk about and we'd never get anywhere close to an hour. But we've not even done half of the questions that I'd written down. So that sort of just shows that the two of you, I can wind you up and let you get on with it. A massive thank you then to both Alec and Stewart for joining us this evening and giving us their insight on what is admittedly a fairly tense, nervy, dangerous subject. So I think we've hopefully handled that with some decorum. A massive thanks as well to everyone who's joined us on the YouTube stream tonight and given us their thoughts and comments. As always, the show will be back next weekend. We will be looking at Rangers as they return to competitive action against Johnston next Saturday. So please do join us for that. It's the same time, which is 9:30 p.m. live on the Gersnet YouTube stream. And of course, the show will be available for download the following Monday. In the meantime, please head over to the website at www.gersnet.co.uk and have a look at all of the great content that we've got over there. But until we meet again next week, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Stay safe and have a great week.